expertise as family caregivers, and they are going to tell us their story. Let me see about microphones. Okay. Do you want them to just use the handheld, or are you going to use them? So set up a handheld? Okay. I think there's another one there for you. All right, come on up, ladies. Thank you. I'll hand this.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you remember that day? It's one that will be etched in your memory for the rest of your life. The nurse walks into the room holding a beautiful baby all wrapped up in its swaddling clothes and looking so comfortable. The dreams of all that can happen lay in front of you, the wonderful highs you'll have and the pride of being a parent. This newborn hasn't been touched by the scars of the world or friends that have betrayed them. I was blessed to have two beautiful daughters. They say when someone gets involved with heroin, there's one of three ways that they will go. Number one is to go to prison, number two is to go to the cemetery, and number three is to get clean. I've walked beside my girls through all three. Of those places, the hardest place I walked was leaving Amy and walking away from the cemetery. My 26-year-old daughter died from the effects of heroin, septicemia, an infection she got from the needles. And she was pregnant. I got a grandson out of that, but more about that later in the story. The daughter standing next to me had to bury her sister, and she'll tell her own story. There's the good, the bad, and the really ugly in our story, but it ends with recovery. Please never give up on the hope that they can recover. I know I certainly had and didn't expect what I got. I remember after Amy died, every time someone knocked on the door, I was sure that it was the police telling me that my other daughter had just died. I'm not here to tell you how to get your child clean, because in all honesty, I really don't know. We pray, we think of all the things that we can do or what will actually work, but in the end we realize it's really up to the kids to decide. I'm sure all of you have been through your own stories and have your own crises. This is about our ugly crisis. I remember one day a phone call that came in from my now 88-year-old mom to tell me that her daughter, my daughters, had stolen her wedding rings and pawned them. I had countless family members call and tell me that they had stolen money or jewelry or whatever it might be to get their next fix. This is the hardest thing for a mom. Of all the things they did, and stealing my mom's wedding rings was not pretty. But what they did, they call escorting. You and I probably call it the oldest profession in the world. The heartbreaking part was those beautiful babies that they had handed me all wrapped up in the hospital were using their body to do something that I just truly couldn't understand. Of all the things that happened, knowing that's how they made their money, I think was the hardest on me. And it left me with a grandchild, no idea who his father is. He's almost 8 years old, and freight train's coming at me where I'm gonna have to tell him. Just not ready for it yet. For the first few years that the girls were using, it was a secret. I kept it safe from the world, because what would the world think of me as a mom if they knew what my girls were doing? At that point, it was only limited to a few family members who had been the victims of them, but that would not last long. When my grandson, I have 2 grandsons. One was 7 when his mom died, and the other one never met her. She died 2 hours before he was born. At one point, it was just limited to the few family members, but as that grandson got to be 6 years old, the girls went to Dejo Casino in Madison. You may remember the time it was as Scott Walker, they were trying to get rid of Scott Walker. So it was on the news all about that they were probably there because of the recall. It wasn't that at all. They were in the front seat of the car, my grandson in the back seat, strapped in his car seat, and they were directly under the security camera at Dejo. You can imagine what happened there. They both went to jail, but the real effects of that didn't hit for 3 days afterwards. I thought, oh, I can keep it a secret. That evening on the local news, their mugshots were up on the screen. I know all of the people watching it saw 2 mugshots, but I saw those 2 precious babies that were handed to me in that blanket in the hospital. The fallout of all of that was the hardest thing that I had been through at that point. I had been a Sunday school teacher, a Sunday school superintendent, the founder of the youth center, and a Girl Scout leader. All the fun things you do just to be with your kids, to raise them right, to do the right thing. All the people in that small town that had known me as all these other things saw those mugshots, and all of a sudden they didn't know me at all. They'd never seen me before. They turned their back. I talk so loud I don't need a mic. Is it sounding okay? Yeah, because I'm not okay. Sorry, guys. Stop. Okay. You would have thought that I was the one doing the drugs. The way that people treated me, I thought I was the one doing the drugs, but I was the mother, and I paid price.
We're sorry about this. This is not working quite.
Okay, all right. I was the mother, but in this incident, I probably paid as high a price as what they did. Yeah. We're kind of switching off, so hopefully this is how. Put that to it. All right. Addiction is like having a voice in your head constantly and addiction is like having a voice in your head. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. No, Lorian can?
No, not very well, Holly.
Okay. Okay. No, yeah, no. Yeah? Okay. All right. Addiction is like having a voice in your head constantly, enthusiastically, encouraging you to set your whole life on fire for no particular reason, and kind of wanting to for reasons you can't understand or explain. When my sister and I were both neck deep in our addictions, my mom said to me, "It feels like Caleb and I are blindfolded in a car going 100 miles an hour with you and Amy driving. I know it's gonna end bad, but there's nothing I can do to stop it, and I can't get us out of the car." For reference, Caleb is Amy's son, my nephew. He was about 5 when my mom said that to me, and he is going on 16 now, and I'll never forget those words. In my active addiction, my mom said lots and lots of things to me that made no effect at all. For whatever reason, I remember that statement word for word. My sister and I were raised mostly by our mom. After our parents split up, I was 6 and Amy was 4. We had great parents. My mom was much more hands-on than my dad was, but they both loved us and were good to us, and either way, we were happy. I was in a car accident when I was 16. I was a passenger. My friend's car flipped a few times and I was ejected. Once I got to the emergency room, I found out I was pregnant. I've forgotten a lot of the details over the years, but I do know that it ended up with me having a miscarriage and a broken pelvis and the very beginning of an addiction to pain pills. Looking back now, I think my miscarriage was a traumatic event that started me on the path to addiction. This was in 2004, the height of the time period in America where Oxycontin overprescribed to every man, woman, and literal child. I was 16 years old and left the hospital with a prescription for daily use of oxycodone. That didn't last forever though. Eventually my prescription got cut off. I was able to graduate high school and I even got my CNA license my senior year. I wasn't taking pills every day or even every week, but when I had the chance I took them. Not just pills either, I was doing other drugs, mushrooms and acid in high school, but only on the weekends. When I was 20, my sister started dating a boy who sold his grandparents' prescription of oxys every month. He had a tendency to snort as many as he sold. This seemed like divine intervention at the time. I thought it was awesome to have a free supplier dropped into my lap right about the time my own prescription ended. Looking back now, I think this was my sister's first introduction to opiate addiction, and I hate to admit that was a huge part of the welcome wagon. She got pregnant, she stopped taking them completely. By the time my nephew Caleb was born 9 months later, me, my boyfriend, and my sister's boyfriend were experiencing the beginning of addiction. I saw them going through withdrawals when they didn't have pills, but I thought I was smarter than them. I thought I was going to somehow avoid the inevitable. I didn't. At 21 years old, I was introduced to heroin by the guy I was dating at the time. It was way cheaper and easier to find than oxys, and it lasted a lot longer. At 22, I started selling the heroin to support my addiction until I got sent to prison. I went to prison when I was 23. I did a very intense AODA program and got out of prison after 20 months. I wasn't done yet though, not even close. Over the next few years, my sister and I bounced between jails and halfway houses and being on the run. It seemed like one of us was always in jail. Sometimes we were there together. I could never make it longer than 6 months before I went back. I spent 5 consecutive Christmases and my birthday in jail. It kind of sucked, but not enough for me to make any type of meaningful change. This kind of stuff isn't fun to have to admit. I know when I was going through my divorce and my husband had cheated on me, I just thought I was the only one in the world that had ever been cheated on. I went to a divorce support group and found out it happens to a lot of people. I hope somehow, by the time we finish today, you'll know you're not alone. Just that you're not alone. What do you do when the beautiful baby that was handed to you in the hospital is arrested for possession of heroin with your grandchild in the car? What do you do when you go to make your car payment and instead of having $250 in your checking account, you now have $2.50 because the rest had been stolen? I tried talking to those girls over and over, and I finally got to the point that I knew I needed to save my breath to cool my soup because they just were not listening. And there was nothing I was going to do that was going to change it. I had a wife pastor at the time who said to me, "You can't control another person, and you cannot control their addiction. So I want you to go out to your garage, get a can of paint, and set it in the middle of your kitchen floor. That's the addiction. You can't move it, you can't walk over it, you can only walk around it and know you have no control over that paint can." After about a month of walking around it, I got it. They were going to make the decision. I was just going to have the consequences. Highs and lows? Yep, we have both. Every time they would start to get clean, I'd have just a little bit of hope, just enough to keep me going the next day. I had hope, enough. until it wasn't enough. Things were not improving, and we were still on that roller coaster ride that we called life. But this time, something was different. Amy sat down with me and said, "Mom, I really need to talk to you." You're gonna hear a lot of different pregnancy stories in here. "I'm pregnant. Will you help me raise this child?" With a broken heart, and in all honesty, I said, "Honey, I'm just too old. I can raise Caleb, who is already 7, but I'm too old to raise another child." With a terrible look of disappointment on her face, I will never forget that she went over, she picked up the phone book, and she started to call adoption agencies. We met with them every Wednesday with tears in both of our eyes, and we were just about to the point of selecting which family would get this precious baby, when on Sunday morning, we were all sitting in the living room and she said, "I don't feel good. I have to go to the hospital." So the ambulance came, her son helped her get dressed. She went to the hospital. She delivered that baby that day, but my baby died in delivery. I know that I had a newborn that we were gonna put up for adoption. That was all I had left of my baby. How could I decide to do this? I'd be 75 years old when he graduates from high school. Guess what? I'm gonna be 75 years old when he graduates from high school. I looked at that baby and I knew that he was all that I had left and that I'd have to make a decision. I don't know if you know, he was in the NICU because he was born 2 months early. There are women that donate their extra breast milk, and there are grandparents whose arms are empty that go to the NICU and rock babies. And I called the nurses at the NICU and I said, "I have to bury my own baby. Can you keep him for 2 weeks while I make the decision?" And they did. And I went and talked to everybody I knew, tried to get everybody's opinion, didn't know, was this really the right thing to do? In the end, it was. And I will say, I wasn't supported by everybody, but I knew that I just had to keep that baby. He's gonna be 8 years old next week, and he is.
Oh, amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
I was very afraid that Holly would relapse if I didn't keep the baby. So I decided to keep him, and Holly relapsed anyway. Now I have a newborn, a relapsed daughter, a broken heart from burying my own daughter, and another 7-year-old to raise. Again, I was old. I almost dyed my hair before today, and then I decided, I've earned every one of these, I think I'm gonna keep it, so you did. Having those boys to get up for the day after the funeral was my reason for going on, and I'll tell the rest in a minute. My sister died in 2016, September 25th of 2016. From about 2 or 3 days later until June of 2019, I was on a long relapse, long. But by 2019, I was 31 years old. I was so tired of the lifestyle and mentally just ready to quit. In March, a bed opened up for me at a detox center about 3 hours north of where we lived. Without any hesitation, my mom borrowed gas money from a friend. She put me and the kids in the car and drove me all the way there. I was there maybe 5 days and convinced the staff I was ready to go home. I did think I was gonna be okay, but unfortunately I relapsed pretty quick. I was back on the same BS, supported myself doing sex work. I was still using heroin every day, but I was also injecting cocaine. I overdosed 5 times, shooting cocaine in less than a year. The last time was at my mom's house. I was unconscious with my head submerged in a bathtub full of water, essentially drowning. My nephew alerted my mom when he heard me fall in the bathroom, and she came in and got me out of the water, but there's no Narcan for a cocaine overdose. She got me back, and I've never ever touched cocaine since that day. It was a real wake-up call, but even though my mind was beyond
ready to quit, my body was still hopelessly addicted. I kept on using and escorting and overdosing on heroin until June 27th, 2019. That day I was with my best friend Corey. We picked up some heroin and headed to the mall to get high. I woke up hours later on the floor of the bathroom. My phone was dead. I had no idea how long I'd been out. I didn't even know if the mall was still open. I ran out of the mall so fast and was incredibly relieved that Corey had waited for me over 3 hours. He was very freaked out. He knew I hadn't left, but he also knew I hadn't come back out and was scared. By this time in my addiction, I was so ready for it to just be over. I knew that if I could somehow get clean, that I could stay clean. Those opiate withdrawals are so nasty. After I woke up on the floor of the bathroom at the mall, Corey and I were gonna head back towards his house. All of a sudden, there was two cop cars behind us with their lights on. It all happened really fast. I ended up in jail that night and so did Corey. I had a long talk with myself on my way to jail that day, and I knew that if I was gonna get clean, now was the time to do it. I stayed in that jail for 5 days, and after 5 days of intense withdrawal, I went to court and I got released. I had two choices at that point. I chose to have my mom pick me up and take me to her house. I told her to hide her wallet and her car keys. I called the next day and got back on the Vivitrol shot. I don't know if people are aware of Vivitrol. It's an opiate blocker. So it sits on your opiate receptors and it blocks opiates from you getting high. So you get the shot every 30 days and there's almost a 0% chance of relapse because you're gonna get no effect. And I'd been on it before. I called the next day, I got back on the Vivitrol shot. I'll never forget how tough those first few weeks were. PAWS, P-A-W-S, is an acronym for post-acute withdrawal symptoms. These are the symptoms that you start to feel after you start to look like you're feeling better, after the initial opiate withdrawals subside. It's incredibly high anxiety, thoughts of self-harm, very intense guilt and shame. I would hardly sleep at night. I had to go to the ER 2 different times with panic attacks. For the first time in many years, I was honest with the doctors about what I was feeling and why. In both instances, they gave me a shot in my arm to alleviate the panic attack because we all knew that if the anxiety wasn't treated, I was going to relapse. I knew it, and I think the doctor did too. I went to jail on June 26, 2019. The next day was my 31-and-a-half birthday, and I'm proud to say I've been clean since then. I moved in with my grandma, and I started working. On my birthday that year, December 27th, I went out and had a good time with my friends. After about 3 days of having what I thought was a hangover, 102-degree fever and a migraine, I went to the emergency room. The nurse came in and looked at me with all seriousness and said, "You know you're pregnant, right?" I was completely shocked. It's one of those situations where you want to be like, shut up. You know, but why would she be in my room saying this to me if it wasn't true? Then she told me I was about 20 weeks along. I just couldn't wrap my head around that. 5 months? I was 31 years old. Never in my life have I shown that I was capable of even raising a cockroach. I knew that I wasn't gonna have much family support if I kept this baby. And I also didn't think that I was capable of being a mom at all. I went home and I also called the adoption agencies. And I started to make arrangements to give my daughter up for adoption. 28 days later, I was back in the hospital because I had contractions all night long. Long story short, my daughter was born at 24 weeks. She weighed 1 pound, 8 ounces, and she had a 15% chance of survival at birth. When I looked at my baby after she was born, she was a fetus, a little purple fetus. She didn't look like she should be outside of the body yet. None of that mattered. I knew the moment I looked at her that I was changed. My life wasn't about me anymore. And from that day forward, I've been a different person. For the next 4.5 months, I took a cab 45 minutes each way every single day to see my daughter. I never missed a day. Being a NICU mama is not for the weak. Eventually, my daughter came home on oxygen and a feeding tube. She ditched the oxygen about 3 months later, and 3 months after that, got rid of the feeding tube. She graduated occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy the first year she was home. She is now 4, and between her and my sister's 2 kids, they are my reason for living. They are my motivation. They are the reason that I won't go back to drugs. When someone is in active addiction, their addiction is telling them that they are worthless. The fact that all of you signed up to hear me speak, nobody wanted to hear anything I had to say for 10 years, and they were perfectly right in feeling that way because it was just going to be a lie or some grandiose story to try to take advantage of. Things like this are what help addicts to put their self-confidence back in themselves and learn who they were before the addiction. When you're using, all hopes and dreams go out the window. Goals aren't even a thought. It took me probably 3 years of kicking butt in my recovery and also being a damn good mom that I started to believe I deserved to live a happy life. I earned my peer support certification this year, but I knew I was capable of more than that. That in itself is an amazing feeling because I lost my own self-confidence for so many years. But because of the many people pouring love and support into me over the last 5 years, I knew I was capable of going to college and getting a degree. 36. But as a kid, I dreamed of being a social worker. Those dreams went out the window many, many years ago. Now I am proud to say that at 36 years old, I enrolled in a technical college to get started on my goal of becoming a social worker. I just started classes last month. I have lost my sister to addiction, my best friend Red, countless friends, I would guess more than 25, but it could be higher than that, honestly. I have a lot of unhealed trauma, unresolved grief, PTSD. I'm on medication now and I see a therapist every 2 weeks. Today I wake up sober and I go to bed sober. I don't spend time feeling guilty for being a snake or a thief. I have rebuilt every relationship I destroyed during my addiction, and that is one thing I'm very proud of. My daughter doesn't know addiction or neglect, and I work hard to keep it that way. In the 5 years since I've gotten clean, I've been asked by more than a few desperate family members, what can I do to help? I've spent a lot of time thinking about my answer, and I think there are 2 things you can do if you have a family member who is still using. Number 1 is to protect yourself, your feelings, your money, your home, your children. You need to keep very strict boundaries. And number 2 is to never stop loving them, and most importantly, believing in them. People who are using drugs don't believe in themselves. They need to know they're not worthless. Walk beside them, don't do for them, and always keep your boundaries. Every time I called my mom from jail, she told me, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
I thought I saved her. It's that snarky little 4-year-old who is now doing fine that actually did it. I never thought I would ever want to live with another man, but I've got 2 of the best men that I could find anywhere, and I'm perfectly happy growing old, raising older kids. I see my daughter every day, whether it's looking at those boys' smiles, or her mannerisms, or her fingers, or just a look on their face while they're sleeping. Life isn't easy. We know that that little bundle of joy that the nurse brought into us is a whole lot of laundry at the end of the day, dishes to do, homework to catch up on, but we make all the difference to them. My older grandson is now 15, and if you've ever raised a 15-year-old boy, you know what I'm talking about. On Mother's Day last year, I came out into the living room and there was a teddy bear that stood about that high. He had a card attached to it, and it said, "Happy Mother's Day, Nani," what he affectionately calls me. He wrote me a letter and said, "I know you didn't have to take us when my mom died, what you did, and I love you, and I'll never forget. All the days that we do, all the things that we do and we think, and my children are out having fun, doing their partying, doing their drugs, doing what they, and I'm doing this again. You're being loved, you just don't know it. Life still has its challenges, with a whole bunch of month left at the end of the money, where the Social Security check just somehow doesn't seem to make it, where I have to pay $10,000 per child to adopt them when I stood up and took them. I don't know where the fathers are. I'm not even sure who one of them is, but not sure what I'm going to tell him when he gets older. I just hope God is there to help me come up with that answer. Please don't give up on yourself, and don't give up on your children. I know when you came today, you probably thought we had some magical ways to get them to get clean. There isn't such a thing. And today, while it looks like we're having a good time, and we are, we walked through 8 years of fire and brimstone to get here. Keep track of your children. Enjoy every bit of them. Before you know it, you'll turn around and they'll be gone. Be there for them while you can, with keeping your own boundaries and hoping that the rest of your family comes back to you at some point. Mine did, but it took a long time. When you guys were getting up and getting here this morning, I was thinking of you. I was thinking of the lady I met in the elevator yesterday, just recently lost her daughter, and I remember the firsts. I remember thinking she was gonna pop out of her bedroom somehow, just come out and get a cup of coffee. She never came. The first Christmas, the first birthday, every event that that child's in, you will say to yourself, she should be here to see this. It's hard. It's very hard. The last thing you want to say to somebody is, it gets better. But it does get better. It really does get better. Enjoy the kids, but take care of yourself. I hope somehow in listening to Holly, the addict herself, you can understand that it's not just a great big joy to go out and get high. After about the second time, you're hooked. And then my younger daughter said to me one day, Mom, you just get up and get going in the morning. I thought, well, doesn't everybody? She said, no. She said, when you're an addict, you get up and you're sick and you have to find the heroin. But in order to find the heroin, you have to find the money to pay for it. The things you have to do to find the money to pay for it. And then you go and meet your dealer in the parking lot, and he comes when he feels like it, because you need him, he doesn't need you. And you finally get the heroin, and then you gotta do it all over again. It's usually at least twice a day. They're not having fun, they're stuck. For me, the tough part was tough love, setting boundaries. I'd never done this before. Babies don't come with manuals. I let them know that I loved them, but I wasn't paying for it. They weren't doing it or drowning in my house. It's hard to know. You do the best you can and you pray. But remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Don't give up.